Hello and welcome to my Stamperia Fortune mini album tutorial series designed for scrap and create. All of the products that I will be using to create this mini album and box will be linked in the description box below, so check those out, purchase your supplies, and follow along. In today's tutorial, we are going to work on building the cover of the album. So I have two pieces of my heavyweight chipboard cut to 6 3/4 by 8.5. Then I have one piece for the spine cut to 2.5 by 8.5. I have two Kraft cardstock pieces cut to 7 3/4 by 9.5. Now on both of these pieces, I measured 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge and I drew a line. This is just a guide or a placement guide to help me when I put my covers onto my paper. I also cut one piece to 4.5 inches by 9.5 inches. And then again, 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge, I drew a line for placement. The first thing I'm going to do is completely cover my chipboard and place it onto my cardstock. Now, if you have not made a mini album before, you want to make sure that you add enough adhesive, but you don't want to saturate this where you have too much because that will actually warp your paper. So what I like to do is just apply a little tiny bit of adhesive, and then I use the tip of my glue bottle to spread this around. So there's not a ton, but it is covered pretty completely when it's done. Once I have my adhesive on, I'm going to flip this over and use my guide to place this down. Now I stop my line also 1/2 inch from each edge. If you didn't do that and your line is straight across, you'll want to just make sure that you center this using that line so that it is straight, and then use your bone folder to burnish this down. Now, once you have your cardstock and your chipboard together, you're going to come in and miter these corners here. So I like to leave about 1/8 of an inch past my corner so that I can wrap it completely. If you cut too close, your corner might be exposed. Now, once I have those mitered corners, I just typically start on that short end, and I'm just going to flip those ends over. I'm going to use my bone folder to press my paper up against that so that it's a nice, tight and crisp fold when I adhere this down. I'm going to flip over and do the same thing on this other side. And now I'm going to just take my adhesive here and apply it to my 1/2 inch tab section. Then I'm going to fold this over and I'm going to repeat what I just did so that I make sure that I get this with the adhesive down really tight against that edge. And now I will repeat that same process on the opposite side. And here's where you will really know if you end up using too much adhesive, because if you do, it's going to seep out of your seams when you press this down. Once those two sides are done, you're going to take your bone folder and you're going to press this paper around that corner. So the easiest way to do this is to run your bone folder flat until it comes off the edge and press this in. You'll see it bend just a little tiny bit and crease. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And then I'm going to take my cover and I'm going to fold these ends over. Same as I did with the first two, I'm going to run my bone folder down that edge to get it to be nice and tight up against that edge. And then I'm going to use my bone folder to crease that paper. Then I'll open back up, and one at a time, I'm going to apply my adhesive and adhere these two flaps down to finish wrapping my cover. Now, once you have this final piece adhered down, you'll be finished with the first cover. So you're going to go ahead and repeat this same process with the second cover. I'm going to do this off camera because it's the same exact process and you don't need to see it twice. If you're unsure, you can go back and rewind the video to rewatch this because it's the same exact process for that second cover. Once we have our two covers, we are going to do the same thing with our spine. So I need my 4.5 by 9.5 inch piece, and I am going to apply my adhesive to the entire spine section. Now, if you are using double-sided tape instead of wet adhesive, you want to make sure that this entire piece is completely covered with tape because you don't want the spine lifting off of the cardstock at any point. And so you have to make sure that it is adhered down really well. And I am placing this right in the center of my cardstock piece. There will be larger than 1/2 inch on each side because these are going to be the tabs that we're going to use to attach it to the front cover when it's done. Now, we're not going to miter corners on this. We're going to do something a little different. So I'm going to be rolling my short sides. Then I'm going to come in here with my bone folder and do the same thing that I did on the covers, except for once I have it over the spine piece, I'm going to take my bone folder right down the edge, crease that paper, and then press this wing down. Now it's going to angle the paper slightly down on the ends of that wing, and that is what we want. So once it kind of covers that edge of the spine, it will be a little bit smaller. So when I put it like this, you'll see it goes slightly down, and that is what we want it to do. I'm going to repeat that same process here on this side. And then once everything is creased, I'll go ahead and unfold this. I'm going to apply my adhesive to this 1/2 inch tab section. Then I'm going to fold this over and repeat what I just did now that it has adhesive so that it will stick down. You can see there's a little bit of adhesive that came out, so obviously I used a little too much there. So if you have a little bit that comes out, then definitely want to just kind of cut back a little bit. If a lot came out, then you really want to make sure that you cut back on how much adhesive you're using. It can be really easy to add too much adhesive thinking that you want to get a really good hold, but then a lot of times what it ends up doing is warping the paper. So just have to be careful, and it's something you have to play with over time, and you'll start to get a feel for how much you need. Now, once I have both sides adhered closed, I'm going to turn my piece over, and I'm going to take my bone folder, and I'm just going to very carefully run this up the side of my chipboard to crease that paper. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, just making sure you get those nice, crisp, clean folds, and this is the easiest way to do that. Now, once I have that piece, these little wings are going to be flat with that chipboard, which is what we want. I'm going to bring my ruler in. I'm going to use this as a guide to help me to place my pieces on straight. Now, with my spine, this is the outside of the spine. I want that facing out. I'm going to apply my adhesive here to this entire wing. I want to make sure I do not go over into that spine section because you will see it. So this is called the lay flat method. So the cover is going to be right next to the spine. So we don't need to leave a space like we do when we do the full wrap method, because the way the cover's open, that gap isn't needed. And the covers will lay completely flat when the album is built. So I'm going to place this on my ruler so that I know that this piece is straight with it. And I'm going to set this down right next to the spine. Again, no space between those pieces, so I'm pressing it up so that it's nice and flush, and I'm making sure that this is straight against my ruler, and then I'll use my bone folder to press this down. Then I'm going to flip this over on the back side. I like to press it from both sides just to make sure that everything is adhered really well. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to add adhesive to the second little wing. Again, being really careful that I don't go too far over and accidentally add my adhesive to that spine section. I have done that before, and you will actually see it's not the end of the world, but it's just something, if you're careful here, you don't have to worry about that. Now I'm going to use my ruler again, making sure that it is flat and straight against my spine piece, no gap, and then flat against the ruler, all three of those pieces. Then I will press this down. And once it's on, I'm going to flip over and adhere this from the back side. So now I have the outside of my cover done, and I'm going to come in here and work on the inside spine section. The first piece we'll need is a piece of cardstock cut to 4.5 by 8 3/8 of an inch. So it's just slightly smaller than the cover itself. And it is the same width as the piece that we cut for the spine, so this is going to be easier to line up. Now I'm going to apply my adhesive to this entire piece. Again, if you are using double-sided tape, you want to make sure that this whole entire piece is covered so it is stuck really well to your spine section. Once you have your adhesive, go ahead and apply this using the sides as a guide. And then the top and the bottom, there's going to be just a little tiny bit less on the top and the bottom edge compared to the cover. Then I'll use my bone folder to go ahead and adhere this down really well. Now I'm going to let this dry before I crease these folds, so I'm going to set this aside, and then I'm going to cut my pieces for my hinge. For the hinge, we're going to cut two pieces. The first is 2.5 by 8 1/4. The second is 3.5 by 8 1/4. And on the small edge on both of these pieces, I'm going to run this down my scoreboard every 1/2 inch across the entire piece. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my 3.5 inch piece, and I'm going to score this every 1/2 inch across that 3.5 inch side. So what we're doing is we are creating the hinge and a hinge extension. That's what I call it. So it allows the pages to lay flatter. So there is a little bit of extra space. Now, once these pieces are scored, I'm going to take my scissors. From that score line, I'm going to cut from the score line inward, and I'm going to miter just that end 1/2 inch tab on both ends. This is going to allow the pocket pages of the album to slide down onto that hinge and stop so that it won't go any further than it needs to. So this will be where the page goes, and then this will be that extension on that hinge. We're going to do the same thing on the 3.5 inch piece. We're going to miter the edges or the ends of just those end 1/2 inch sections. So now I've got my 2 pieces that look like this, and I'm going to go ahead and bring my scoreboard out of here and start folding these pieces. I'm going to start with my smaller hinge piece. I like to start in the center and work outward. I'm going to fold it, and then I'm going to use my bone folder to crease that fold. I like to start with my bone folder in the center because I find that it helps the paper not shift as much, and then I can hold it at the top and the bottom. If you start here, sometimes you'll actually end up pushing that paper in the wrong direction. I'm going to move over to the other 2 score lines. And once I have everything scored in one direction, then I will fold everything in the opposite direction and use my bone folder again to crease these score lines. So I'm basically creasing the score lines in both directions, which will help these pages to move a little bit easier when I turn the pages in my album. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my 3.5 inch hinge. And then I'll come back and show you how we're going to assemble these and place these in the album. Once my hinges are completely scored, I'm going to take the smaller hinge and find that center 1/2 inch. And I'm going to apply my adhesive to this entire 1/2 inch section on that back side. Now, once I have my adhesive on my smaller hinge, I'm going to place this down into the center of my larger hinge. So I'm going to use those score lines as a guide for placing these 2 pieces together. So once I have this, I like to fold over in one direction and make sure everything's lined up, and then very carefully fold over in the other direction, make sure things are lined up, and then burnish this down. So you have just a little tiny bit of time that you can make some adjustments to that hinge if it's not straight in that 1/2 inch section. Now I'm going to adhere this down. And I do like to flip those hinges so that everything is creased and folded and nice and secure. So now I have my hinges like this. I'll bend these 2 last ones up, and there are my 4 hinges for my pages. And I'm left with this on the back side where I've got 3 1/2 inch sections. I'm going to set that aside for a second and bring my cover back in. And now I'm going to take my bone folder there, and I'm going to run my bone folder up that crease, and I'm going to slowly pull that cover up as I do so. And I'm going to just bend this right over. Then I'm going to do the same thing here. Creasing and bending that cover so that now I have that book shape, and you will see that covers the flat, so it will lay completely flat when it is open. I need to mark my spine so that I can place my hinges here, so I use my centering ruler. So I am marking mine at 3/4 of an inch from center, and I will be doing this on the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to make sure that this is here, just to give me an idea, I'm going to have 1/8 of an inch on the top and the bottom where the cover is larger than my actual hinge section. So I'm applying my adhesive here to this 1.5 inch center section of my larger hinge. Again, if you were using double-sided tape instead of wet adhesive, every single inch of this needs to be completely covered with tape so that it does not lift off of your spine. I have had that happen before in albums when I used to use double-sided tape because I didn't put enough tape and the tape wasn't strong enough, so I don't use double-sided tape anymore. Once you have your adhesive on, you're going to go ahead and come in here and lay down your hinge using those marks that you placed as a guide, and then adhere everything down so it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to take my bone folder, just like I did with the first hinge. I'm going to move each of these hinges and use my bone folder to make sure that everything is adhered and pressed down really nicely. So now we have our 4 hinges inside our album. It is ready to go and ready to build our base pages, which we will do next. To make the base pages, we're going to have top loading pocket pages. You need 4 pieces that are 6 1/8 by 8 1/4, and you'll need 4 pieces that are 7 1/8 by 8 1/4. The 6 1/8 inch pieces we're going to set to the side. We don't need to do anything to those ones, but for our 7 1/8 inch pieces, on the 7 1/8 inch side, we need to score this at 1/2 inch on both ends. Then we're going to take our scissors and we're going to miter these ends on both of those 1/2 inch tab sections. So I'm going to do this for all 4 of my pieces, then we'll come back and assemble our pages. Once all of those pieces are scored, you're going to go ahead and fold on those score lines and use your bone folder to burnish each of those folds. So I have already done this with all of my pieces. These ones are ready to go. Now I'm going to take my 6 1/8 inch pieces and I am going to be creating a notch in my pages using my envelope punch board by We Are Memory Keepers. If you don't have this, you can use a circle punch at the top, or you can skip this step if you don't want to do this. I'm going to punch right in the center at the top. So my page is 6 1/8, so this is just a little bit less than 3 1/8. And then I'm going to punch like this, and I'm going to do this for all of my pieces. Now this is what the piece will look like when it's assembled. I will show you how to put it together in just a minute. So this is the front of the page that will go on the hinge, and then this is the back of the page. Now the front is going to have that notch in it. So I'm going to take one piece with my notch and one piece with my hinges. I'm going to turn the hinge piece over so that the hinges are facing up, and I'm going to place my adhesive on the hinge on the right hand side only. I'm going to leave that left hand one completely open for now, because once we're done with our page, both building it and decorating it, then we'll place it in the album. So with my adhesive on that right hand tab, I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to line up the edge of my paper, and I'm going to make sure that the top and bottom edges are aligned as well. Once everything is lined up, then I'll use my bone folder to burnish this down. So there is the front of the page with my little notch in my pocket, and then here is the back of my page. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I assemble all 4 pages the same way. Now you should have all 4 of your pages assembled where they look like this. Nothing else will be adhered down at this point because we will do that at a later time. That is all for this tutorial. So we have our album base assembled and we have our base pages assembled. In the next tutorial, we're going to go on and start building up our pages. So we'll start with page 1. We'll do the front and back of page 1. Then we'll go on to page 2, 3, and 4 in separate videos. Stay tuned for the next tutorial.